Imagine Baltimore, a city forged in struggle, triumph, and an unyielding spirit. Tonight, we dive into a journey where each snap, each throw, and every electrifying run wrote a new chapter in football history. Imagine a time when the quarterback position was a revolving door of hope, risk, and raw ambition, until one man redefined it all. Baltimore's franchise does not have the lineage of some of the other teams like the Green Bay Packers and their legendary leaders, and then them having the fortune to go from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. The San Francisco 49ers went from Montana to Young, the history and rich tradition of the Indianapolis Colts, and them having the fortune of turning things over to Andrew Luck after they moved on from Peyton Manning. No, this is a story of the Baltimore Ravens quarterbacks, a legacy of pioneers, rebels, and revolutionaries. Now, don't get me wrong, this list does not include names like John Stark, Wally Richardson, Wes Pate, John Harris, Derek Anderson, Tyrod Taylor, Keith Weddington, and Trace McSorley. Even though they all were Baltimore Ravens quarterbacks, they never started a game for the franchise, and some of them never started a game, period. Welcome, Ravens flock. Today, we take a deep dive. We're exploring how a hodgepodge of signal callers turned the quarterback position into an art form. From the hesitant beginnings with seasoned veterans to the electrifying takeover of Lamar Jackson. Every player on this list has shaped what Baltimore football means today. But we will not only honor the legends, from the trailblazing Vinny Testaverde to the dynamic dual-threat icon Lamar Jackson. We also chart every starting quarterback in our franchise's history. Buckle up, this journey is as unpredictable and thrilling as a fourth quarter comeback at M&T Bank Stadium. The city of Baltimore had a renaissance in 1996, but the road was anything but smooth. The Baltimore Ravens entered the NFL, formerly the Cleveland Browns, with a new mindset and a new city and an old friend. The team brought with them starting signal caller Vinny Testaverde, who had been with the franchise the previous 3 seasons. Testaverde, an experienced veteran with a resume that spanned decades. His leadership was the first beacon in a storm of change. But even as Testaverde laid the framework, Baltimore wasn't ready for a one-size-fits-all approach. The former Heisman Trophy winner was known for his big arm, but was also known for being a bit turnover prone. Think Jameis Winston 30 years ago. Testaverde ended his 21-year career with 275 touchdowns versus 267 interceptions, so that tells the story. In 1998, his second year in the NFL, he threw 35 interceptions. 35 in one season. And throughout the rest of his career, he had 4 seasons with 20 plus interceptions. Ugh. But sometimes all you need is a change of scenery. Even though it was the same team, kinda, something changed in his first year in Baltimore. For the first time in his career, he started all 16 games and had a career season. He passed for a career high in yards and touchdowns. He threw for 4,177 yards to go with 33 touchdowns, but he also threw 19 picks. But this was still a career year up until this point of his career, and he earned his first ever Pro Bowl nod. Testaverde won the first game ever in the Baltimore Ravens' existence at good old Memorial Stadium versus the Oakland, LA, whatever Raiders. He even scored the first touchdown in the team's history. That year, the Ravens had 2 1,000-yard receivers. Now, this is something that Ravens fans today, it may be a little bit new to them because they've never seen this before, nor would they ever think that this could be possible with this franchise. But back in the day when the Ravens first started out, they were an offensive juggernaut. They could not be stopped. It was the defense that actually held this team back. And unlike the Ravens culture of today, Baltimore's defense sucked. The defense was ranked 28th in the league in points against and 30th in yards allowed. But you have to remember, at this time, there were only 30 teams in the league. So defensively, they were the worst team in the NFL, which led to the Ravens going 4-12 in its inaugural season. but things were looking up. The Ravens had just drafted a middle linebacker out of Miami, and things would change sooner or later. But soon enough, though, names like Eric Zaire emerged during the 97-98 season, along with a young Jim Harbaugh, a man who, long before his coaching stardom, briefly held down the reins. The late 90s saw the team experiment with quarterbacks. In 99, they had Tony Banks, Stoney Case, and Scott Mitchell each stepped into the spotlight, their fleeting moment hinting at both promise and peril in a franchise still searching for its identity. So now let's jump into these seasons and see what these starting QBs were actually about. Entering its second year in the 97 season, the Ravens thought that they would be in better shape defensively, especially after drafting linebackers Peter Boulware, go Florida State, 4th overall, and linebacker Jamie Sharper in the 2nd round. And it's not the Sharper that you're thinking about, thank God. And they also picked up safety Kim Herring in the 2nd round as well. So the Baltimore's defense was starting to take shape and be in good hands. But Baltimore knew that this offense had to do the heavy lifting while the other side found its footing. But year 2, Vinny Testaverde regressed, throwing only for 2,971 yards and 18 touchdowns to go along with 15 interceptions, which was more along his career arc. This led the Ravens to have a 4-8-1 record before turning everything over to quarterback Eric Zaire, who took over for the last 3 games. Zaire, going 2-1 in those games, passed for over 800 yards and had a 6-0 touchdown to interception ratio. He finished the 1997 season with 958 yards, 7 touchdowns, and only 1 interception. The Ravens finished the season 6-9-1, so you know who was eventually going to be the starter for the 1998 season. So, in the 1998 offseason, Vinny Testaverde decided to move on and go to the New York Jets. Even back then, the Jets loved signing former Baltimore Ravens players, and this would become a trend over the next 30 years. I don't know what this fascination with Baltimore is, but hey, it's Baltimore, I get it. So the Ravens decided to move forward with Eric Zaire. Of course, they did, especially with the way he ended the 1997 season. Now, even though he was technically the starter, the Ravens had some sort of plan. Zaire started the first 3 games of the season, but newly acquired backup Jim Harbaugh, yes, that Jim Harbaugh, he and Zaire both split time in the first 3 games. Don't know what the plan was, but that's how they ran things. But then in games 4 and 5, Eric Zaire started each and every game, playing every snap. The Ravens were sitting at 2-3 and knew something needed to change. They knew something had to be done about the quarterback situation. So in week 6, we saw them go back to the same formula, but Harbaugh showed the reason they brought him in. He went 0-6 with 2 interceptions. 0-6 in a football game. I don't know. Well, at least he completed 2 passes to somebody, anybody. And this was just enough for the Ravens to turn back to the younger Harbaugh to be the starter for the rest of the season. Go figure. Week 9 saw Harbaugh have his best game of the season versus the hated AFC Central rival, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Back then, it was a different time and the Jaguars were a different team, and for some reason, no matter what the Ravens did, they could not beat them. But Harbaugh ended up throwing for 243 yards and 3 touchdowns on 34 pass attempts, completing 27. And that just goes to show you the efficiency back then of Ravens quarterbacks. This man completed 27 passes and did not have 300 yards. Think about that for a second. Man, the quarterbacking was so bad back then for the Ravens. Incredible. But I guess when you have to throw to guys like Jermaine Lewis and Floyd Turner, that does not strike fear into other defenses. The defenders don't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, these are the guys I got to defend tomorrow. What am I going to do? So it is what it is. The Ravens eventually ended up losing that game 45-19, and now looking back, that 2-2 start seemed like a long distant memory. The rest of the season was more of the same, with Baltimore constantly losing games. They lost a shootout to the San Diego Chargers and quarterback Craig Wheelingham, 14-13. It was an offensive explosion, trust me. They then won versus the Bengals with Jim throwing for a scorching 92 yards. Then things started to look up. The next week, the Ravens beat the Colts for a 2-game win streak. The same Colts that in 95, Jim Harbaugh almost led to the Super Bowl.
Takes the snap, drops the throw, sets, he airs it out, deep into the right-hand corner. Everybody in the end zone. They battle for the ball. It is. No, they stay incomplete.
Baltimore now sat at 5-7, and their defense has seemed to turn a corner. They held 8 of their 16 opponents under 17 points. And this is with an offense that was a little physically challenged.
Break some veins! Break some veins!
The Ravens would go on to lose 3 of their next 4, but it was the Week 15 matchup that may have changed the course of the Ravens forever. In that week, they saw the league's best team in the one-loss Minnesota Vikings. The Ravens got an up-close look at the offensive coordinator of that juggernaut, which turned out to be Brian Billick. And a dream was formulated, a dream was born.
A dream of simple fantasy.
Baltimore ended up finishing the season 6-10. Harbaugh finished the year going 5-7, throwing for 1,839 yards with 12 touchdowns to go against 11 interceptions. Eric Zaire went 1 for 3 for 1,312 yards with a 4-3 touchdown to interception ratio. Both of those quarterbacks combined didn't amount to a hill of beans.
What's that smell?
So now we move on to the 1999 season. And in 1999, it brought about a lot of change for the Ravens. The first and only head coach in Baltimore Ravens history, Ted Marchibroda, was released, and the Ravens won the bidding war for the services of Brian Billick. He was the architect of the highest scoring team in league history, well, at least at the time, so he was definitely going to turn the Ravens offense into a functioning unit that would at least be top 15 in the league. But first, they would have to add some talent to the offense and bring in a quarterback to run Billick's system. Enter Scott Mitchell. Yes, the same Scott Mitchell who filled in for Dan Marino and parlayed that into a few solid seasons with the Detroit Lions. But in Baltimore, he would not be throwing to Herman Moore, Brett Perriman, I think you know who his son is, and Johnny Morton. And of course, he would not have the likes of Barry Sanders in the backfield to keep the defenses honest. But Mitchell had a big arm and starting experience. And along with Mitchell, they signed Tony Banks from the Rams and Stoney Case from the Cardinals. But unfortunately, the Scott Mitchell era only lasted a little over a game, with him passing for 236 yards, 1 touchdown, and 4 interceptions. This was an epic swing and a miss, just like what was to come in a couple of seasons. So the Ravens turned to Stoney Case, who threw for 165 yards and 3 interceptions in his first start of the season versus the newly reborn Cleveland Browns. But the Ravens won the game off of the strength of their defense, only giving up 10 points. Case started the next 3 games, but against the Chiefs, he had another 3 interception game. So the Ravens turned to Tony Banks for the rest of the season. But Banks was just as mid as the rest. And in week 10, the Ravens lost to those same Jaguars 6-3. This defense gave up 6 points, and the Ravens could not find a way to win. It was some dark days back then. Oh my goodness. So for you new Ravens fans, you are truly lucky. In week 13, Banks led the Ravens to the first of what would be a 4-game winning streak, beating the Tennessee Titans 41-14. Whew, 41 back then. Yikes. Banks threw for 332 yards and 4 touchdowns. And over those 4 games, Tony threw for 1,085 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, with 3 of those interceptions coming against the Saints. The Ravens did end up losing their season finale versus the Patriots, but for the first time in franchise's history, they did not have a losing record. It wasn't a winning record, but they didn't lose. They didn't have that losing season, and it was a sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment, and the Ravens had nowhere to go but up from here. And with the way the season ended and with Tony Banks' play, the Ravens had hope for the future. Tony Banks finished the season going 6-4, throwing for 2,136 yards with 17 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. And at this time, I truly thought that Tony Banks may have been the quarterback of the future for the Baltimore Ravens. But things don't always go as you want, and things do not always go as planned. So now the team had the head coach. They had the unquestioned QB that would lead them into a new era. Now, as the new millennium dawned, the Ravens quarterback carousel spun even faster. In the 2000 season, the franchise took a bold gamble, dividing responsibilities between Tony Banks and the strategic mind of Trent Dilfer. This wasn't merely about wins and losses, it was the steep, murky learning curve of building a contender. And with the Ravens coming off their first non-losing season, there was hope in the air. Baltimore had his QB, they had their man head coach, the defense was shaping up to be one of the best in the league. And then the Ravens brought in a former 6th overall pick to be the backup just in case, and also drafted quarterback Chris Redman in the 3rd round out of Louisville. They signed a future Hall of Fame tight end and drafted a future 2,000-yard rusher. Things were looking up in Charm City. There was this sense that this team could be really good and have its first winning season in the franchise's history. The Ravens started off the 2000 season on fire, going 5-1 in their first 6 games. They also finally broke through by beating a division rival for the first time. In week 2, the Ravens faced the Jacksonville Jaguars. They fell behind 36-32 with a minute and 42 seconds left in the game. Tony Banks led the Ravens on a 7-play, 75-yard touchdown drive in a minute and 4 seconds, hitting Shannon Sharp for the game-winning touchdown. On the day, Banks went for 262 yards to go with 5 touchdowns. With a white-hot start and Banks leading this team to its best start ever, nothing could go wrong, right?
Wrong.
The month of October, and with all of its mystery, had a trick-or-treat for the Baltimore Ravens. Believe it or not, the Ravens did not score 1 touchdown during the month, not a one. Baltimore went on a stretch of 5 games where they would not cross the goal line at all, not on offense, not on defense, nor on special teams. And surprisingly, they still won 2 of those games off of what is arguably the greatest defense of all time. So in a Week 8, 14-6 loss to the Titans, the Ravens benched Tony Banks and turned to Trent Dilfer for the rest of the season. Dilfer ended up losing his first start versus the Steelers, but in Week 10, it happened.
Time in the pocket, throws underneath. Stokely's got it. He's at the 10, the 5. Touchdown! Brandon Stokely has gone where no Raven has for 21 quarters.
Dilfer threw for 3 touchdowns that game and ended the Ravens' 5-game streak of futility. This was a significant move for Baltimore as they would not lose another game that season.
We're not going to lose. And we may never lose a game again.
Going on to win Super Bowl 35.
The throw, Trent Dilfer. Throwing deep down the middle for Stokely. He's got it. 10-5. Touchdown!
During this span, Dilfer went 7-1 during the regular season with 1,502 yards passing, 12 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. Dilfer showed up when he was needed the most, but there were questions about his long-term future going forward in Baltimore. By 2001, the narrative took an unexpected turn. The Ravens were flying high. They had their first winning season. They were the reigning Super Bowl champions. All was well at the harbor, but Billick wanted more. Both starting quarterbacks from the 2000 season were gone, something that to this day Dilfer still fumes over about. So you had Banks and Dilfer out, enter Elvis Grbac and Randall Cunningham. Coming off of a 4,000-yard passing season with the Kansas City Chiefs, Grbac was signed to a 5-year, $30 million deal. Remember this fact going forward. They were hoping he would elevate Billick's offense and become a complement to the league's best defense. Cunningham was brought in because of his familiarity with Billick's concepts, leading that historic 1998 Vikings team. Well, things did not get off to a good start, with running back Jamal Lewis tearing his ACL in his left knee during training camp. And all this was documented as the Ravens were the very first team to appear on Hard Knocks. So the Ravens scrambled to find a replacement and went with old man Terry Allen. So now the Ravens would have to lean heavily on a passing game and a defense if they were to have any shot at returning to the Super Bowl. The Ravens' D was elite.
Pause.
But Grbac was not as advertised. He finished the season going 8-6, throwing for 3,033 yards with 15 touchdowns and 18 interceptions. He even had the audacity to cry on the field, knowing that he had failed this team. But just when you thought that was bad, he was even worse in the playoffs. In the AFC divisional round versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, Elvis completed 18 of 37 passes for 153 yards and 3 interceptions, and the Ravens' chances of repeating went up in smoke, losing to eventual Raven Cordell Stewart. Ugh. Also during that season, Randall Cunningham started 2 games and went 2-0 for the Ravens, but after the season he retired. And in an even more surprising move, Elvis Grbac quit on the team. 1 season into his 5-year deal, he gave up on the Baltimore Ravens. So not only did the Ravens need a new signal caller, the contract itself put a big dent in the Ravens salary cap situation. I didn't agree with the topic then, I didn't agree with the talking points, but maybe the Ravens possibly should have kept Trent Dilfer. Maybe they should have let him go because it eventually led up to the Ravens being who they are today. If they'd have kept Dilfer, we don't know what might have happened. But going out and signing Elvis Grbac was a huge mistake, one that haunted this franchise for years to come. So in 2002, the Ravens were on the hunt for another quarterback. 7 years in the NFL, and they are on their 6th opening day starter. It's funny how nowadays Ravens fans laugh at the Browns and other teams for their revolving door at QB, but for those new Ravens fans who didn't know, they didn't have to go through the suffering. They didn't have to live through the horrors that we all went through, especially early on. So then the Ravens went out and signed former Bengal quarterback Jeff Moonball Blake, and former 3rd round pick Chris Redman got to start the season. Redman played decently as the Ravens started the season 3-3, throwing 7 touchdowns to go with 3 interceptions. But a back injury would prematurely end his season. So Jeff Blake took over and the Ravens went 4-6 to end the season at 7-9. Jeff finished the season throwing for 2,084 yards to go with 13 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. So then we move on to 2003. And in 2003, we are now 3 years removed from winning the Super Bowl, and the Ravens were on opening day starter number 7 in only year 8. But this year was different. This was a year that I think changed the course of the Baltimore Ravens forever. Billick and the Ravens were tired of the merry-go-round at the quarterback position and were set to draft one in the 1st round. With the likes of Carson Palmer, Byron Leftwich, which we'll have more on in a minute, and Sexy Rexy. You also had future coaches Cliff Kingsbury and Ken Dorsey in this draft. So how could a team go wrong? Well, very easily it seems. Sometimes the football gods work in your favor, even though you don't believe it when it happens. You may not see it that way at that time, but eventually things all come together. So picture this, draft night. The Ravens have their sights on a quarterback. They found their man. They are going to move up to get him until time runs out on the clock and the next team drafts the quarterback that you wanted. The Ravens had traded up to the 7th pick with the Minnesota Vikings to select Byron Leftwich, but couldn't get the league office on the phone. I don't know, the phone systems were a little bit different back then. How the hell do you get a busy signal when you know that teams are trying to call you to make trades? But for some reason, the Ravens were not able to get through. So, well, you know what happened. The time runs out. And the Jacksonville Jaguars ended up selecting Byron Leftwich, leaving the Ravens to scramble, and they ended up with some guy, Terrell Suggs at 10. I don't know if you know that guy. The Ravens were left in a free fall. They were scrambling to find out what to do. They had picked a guy because the guy that they wanted was off the board. Now they had to regroup and find out which direction that they were going to go in and what players were still available at the quarterback position. So even though this left them scrambling to find the QB of the future, things changed. Luckily, unluckily, I guess things fell into place for the Ravens to go get their man. The Ravens traded their 2nd round pick, which ended up being number 41, and their 2004 1st rounder to the New England Patriots for the 19th overall pick and selected quarterback Kyle Bowler. Bowler, who was a 4-year starter at Cal, never threw for 3,000 yards or completed 55% of his passes, but somehow he was a top 20 pick in this draft. But hey, at least he could throw a ball 60 yards from his knees, right? Because that skill will translate to the NFL well. Kyle went on to start 9 games, going 5-4, throwing for 1,260 yards and 7 touchdowns to go with 9 interceptions. That year, the Ravens also signed quarterback Anthony Wright, who I always would see strolling around Owens Mills Mall. Thanks, Anthony. But Wright led the Ravens to a 5-2 record and a playoff berth where they would eventually lose to the Tennessee Titans. Now, in 2004, the Ravens signed King Ugly. If you know, you know. And just for the 2nd time in this team's history, the Ravens started the same QB in consecutive seasons. Bowler went on to start all 16 games, going a surprising 9-7. He threw for 2,559 yards with 13 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. But the Ravens missed the playoffs and looked forward to the 2005 season. Now, 2005 was more of the same. Bowler entered the season as a starter for a third year in a row, and Anthony Wright returned to the team. Both of these quarterbacks, with their play combined, led the Ravens to a 6-10 season, and this was another year that was lost to this dysfunctional offense. You would think that now we're entering year 10 in the league, we're still not figuring things out at the quarterback position, but things would change really, really soon. So the 2006 season brought about renewed hope. The Ravens defense was still dominating, and if you ask me honestly, this may have been the greatest Ravens defense of all time, even besting the 2000 season. Not to play down the level of competition that they had in 2000, but as far as turnovers go, as far as the way that they played, this 2006 defense may have been the greatest of all time. And you can put the numbers up versus everybody else, but to me, this was the best. And I thought that this year was the best opportunity for the Ravens to get Super Bowl #2, but we'll see what happens. And not to mention that this defense that was already great and stout, they added Haloti Ngata in the first round. So you make something great even better. But, offensively, we Ravens, so, Now, all they needed was a competent QB to take them over the top. And fortunately for us this season, the Tennessee Titans drafted quarterback Vince Young out of Texas, and this made their starter, their former MVP, the guy that led them to a Super Bowl, in Steve McNair, expendable. So the Ravens traded a 2007 4th-round pick, because it was after the draft, for the former MVP and had their sights set on a Super Bowl once again. So during the season, Steve McNair passed for 3,050 yards to go with 16 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Wasn't great, wasn't as bad as the play that we used to have, but what he did do was he led the Ravens to a 13-3 record. This at the time was the most wins in franchise history. The defense was number one in damn near every statistical category and were one of the favorites to reach the championship game. But first up in the divisional round, the Ravens were set to play the 12-win Indianapolis Colts and Peyton Manning, but the game was at home. So, confidence was high. We believed that we were going to win. Peyton Manning was Peyton Manning, but we had this defense. We had a defense that dominated people. We had a defense that confused the best quarterbacks in the game. So it was no biggie to think that the Ravens defense could actually go in here and shut things down. And they actually did. The Colts could only muster 15 points, and this defense held Manning to 170 yards passing and 2 interceptions. But the Ravens offense turned out that they were just even worse. McNair had 173 yards himself and 2 picks of his own. The Ravens' normally strong ground game only mustered 83 yards, and the Ravens squandered a golden opportunity, falling to the Colts 15-6. One of the greatest quarterbacks ever, they gave up 5 field goals and only put up 2 field goals of their own. And to me, I think this may have been, at the time, one of the most disappointing seasons I've seen in sports, because I just knew what the Ravens were doing all regular season long. I knew they were going to win the Super Bowl. I just didn't know that they would just pick the wrong time to not score any points. Yeah, that one hurt. That one hurt a little bit. So, in 2007, the writing was on the wall. Steve McNair's body just couldn't hold up anymore, and the Kyle Bowler experiment was just about at its end. What was once a promising marriage between the Baltimore Ravens and Brian Billick was a complete bust. It was a complete failure, at least offensively. We did win a Super Bowl, but the offense never took shape. 2007 was a culmination of ifs, ands, or buts. As a team, the Ravens passed for 3,035 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. Their inability to score points and sustain drives screamed that this team needed change. They needed something different. But it was a Week 15 matchup, a Week 15 loss to the previously winless Dolphins, that would seal Brian Billick's fate. His inability to build a competent offense or develop a quarterback in Baltimore ended his time here, but would lead to a dramatic change in the organization and set it on a course for what the Ravens are to this day. I personally like Brian Billick, but once we lost that game, I knew his time had come. He just never developed an offense. He never developed a quarterback, being this offensive genius. So we knew that something had to change, and it actually did. For the 2008 season, the Ravens had a rookie head coach come in John Harbaugh, a former special teams coach leading a team for the first time. But even he knew that he needed a quarterback to succeed in the NFL, and the Ravens were hell-bent on getting one. In the draft, the Ravens had a QB in mind and held the 8th pick overall of the draft. But Matt Ryan was taken with 3rd overall selection, and the Ravens decided to trade back to the 26th pick. Baltimore then traded back up to the 18th pick and selected Delaware quarterback Joe Flacco. Not a big name in the draft, but the Ravens did their homework on him, and he, up until this point, was the best quarterback, honestly, in Ravens history up to this point. But early on, Flacco was not supposed to start his rookie season. They had Troy Smith, but Troy Smith got tonsillitis and he was out, and Kyle Bowler injured his shoulder, effectively ending his time with the Baltimore Ravens, so Joe Flacco ended up being the last man standing. Now, this seismic shift rocked the city. Joe Flacco had arrived and soon became the steady heartbeat of our franchise. Nearly a decade of ice-cold precision, clutch playoff performances, and a calm demeanor under pressure, Flacco came to embody reliability in an era fraught with experimentation. Whether you can argue if he was elite or not, it really didn't matter. With every game, he carved out his own era. His leadership wasn't just about reading defenses, it was about forging a winning mentality. And under his watchful eye, the Ravens claimed playoff glory anchored by his trademark long passes and unflinching coolness in the face of adversity, hence the nickname of Cool Joe. So from 2008 through the 2014 season, Joe Flacco started every game, going to 3 AFC Championship games and winning the Super Bowl. And he also won Super Bowl MVP in 2012. Now, during that run in 4 playoff games, Flacco had 1,140 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 0 picks. He had a passer rating of 117.2, all while taking out quarterbacks Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, and Tom Brady. And to me, this may have been one of the best playoff runs by any quarterback of all time. Now, after the Super Bowl, the Ravens lost some of its key pieces like Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, and Quan Bolden, and 2013 was harsh. It just was a season not even worth talking about. Coming from off of a Super Bowl win to what the Ravens became that season wasn't good times. But we still lived off the high of that 2012 season. But in 2014, with new offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak, Flacco had his best year, throwing for 3,986 yards to go with 27 touchdowns and 12 picks. Joe also led the Ravens to the divisional round of the playoffs, where once again he balled out, but they lost to the New England Patriots. Flacco did give the Ravens 2 separate 14-point leads, but the defense could not hold on. Yeah, and that takes me back to a bad time, because I remember right after that playoff loss, I did some work in one of the Ravens players' house. And when I saw him, all I could think of was, you gave up 200 yards and 2 touchdowns by yourself. But I had to be professional. I had to keep it together, but I wanted to. 2014 was another loss one. So in 2015, it was a total regression of the team, with Flacco only starting 10 games, going 3-7, and getting injured versus the Rams. And then the quarterback carousel would begin. Matt Schaub started the next 2 games, followed by Jimmy Clausen, the next 2, and Ryan Mallett ended the season, starting the final 2 games of the season. The Ravens ended up 5-11 and looked towards 2016 because this season just was terrible by all standards. Now, Flacco came back and started all 16 games in 2016, and this season was the season that he finally broke the 4,000-yard barrier. He threw for 4,317 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 16 interceptions. The Ravens went 8-8, but there was hope because Flacco's injury didn't set him back, and the future seemed extremely bright. And though the future did seem bright for 2017, the Ravens decided to get on the computer and upload mid all season long. Now, Joe Flacco started all 16 games once again, and the Ravens went 9-7, but they did have an opportunity to make the playoffs at the end of the season. All they had to do was win the final game, the last game of the season, versus the lowly Cincinnati Bengals, and the Baltimore Ravens would be playoff bound. Even though there was not a lot of expectation for 2017, the Ravens could have made the playoffs and made some noise. All they had to do was beat these Cincinnati Bengals. But, it's nothing to see here.
Ravens trying to end it here. 4th down. Dalton steps up. Dalton throws. It's complete. Caught by Boyd. Tyler Boyd. Touchdown. Remarkable.
Like, what the fuck? 4th down. But this is a video about quarterbacks, but that still hurts. Cause I remember that day because my son and I were at the light rail, and all the light rails were late, and it was one of the coldest days in Baltimore. My son decided that he wanted to be one of the kids of the day and go with his sweatshirt and a little jacket, and got really, really cold to where strangers started giving him clothes. And I was like, you know what? We got to go home. We can't do this. So we went home, watched the game, and the Ravens blew an opportunity to make the playoffs once again. Now, just when it seemed like the chapter on the Baltimore's quarterback legacy was written, the script got flipped. Going into 2018, not much was really expected. John Harbaugh was getting the Brian Billick treatment, and the Ravens drafted another tight end for Joe Flacco. But then, in a surprise move, in Ozzie Newsome's last first-round draft pick ever,
with the 32nd pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the Baltimore Ravens select Lamar Jackson. Quarterback.
Lamar freaking Jackson. A surprise to many.
Surprise, surprise. Surprise, surprise.
But this pick turned out to be one of the greatest picks in Ravens history, especially at the quarterback position. Now, not much was expected of Lamar in his first year because he was viewed as a raw prospect, but when Joe Flacco injured his hip versus the Steelers, this opened the door for Lamar to walk right in and never look back. Lamar took over a 4-5 team, a coach on the hot seat, and a fan base craving a winner. Jackson burst onto the scene, an electrifying dual-threat quarterback whose legs and arms rewrote the playbook. While Flacco's tenure was about controlled, strategic mastery, Jackson ushered in a revolutionary high-octane style that left defenses gasping. Lamar led the Ravens to a 6-1 record and first place in the AFC North. Baltimore would eventually end up losing in the wildcard round, where fans cheered for Flacco to come back and finish the game. They booed Lamar, they wanted Flacco, understandably, but you have to let him go through learning curves. Like, you don't just go in bad times, snatch him out, and then hope that he's going to be something else. And it's a good thing that they didn't, because it was a learning experience, and Lamar only got better from there. Lamar ended up ending that game pretty strong, but it was too little too late. The Ravens were out in the first round versus a team they had beaten earlier that season. And Lamar proved that he was more than just a quarterback. He was a symbol of Baltimore's relentless spirit. His dynamic play and his record-breaking feats had transcended the field, inspiring a generation and redefining our team's identity. Now, this is where we move into the good stuff, QB-wise, I mean. So, the 2019 season brought about a first in B-more, something that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. A beautiful surprise that would change the fortunes of this franchise. The Ravens traded Joe Flacco to the Denver Broncos, the team and fans he traumatized in 2012.
How does that happen in the Denver secondary?
That is stunning. That with a 3-man rush and dropping 8.
So Lamar had a full offseason as the starter with a new OC and all the reps at QB1. But Lamar did something that many didn't expect. He shot out of the gate in game 1, throwing for 324 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also had a perfect passer rating. Lamar would then go on to start the next 14 games while leading the Ravens on a 12-game win streak. Robert Griffin III started the season finale, throwing for a whopping 96 yards in a win versus the Steelers. So on the season, Lamar passed for 3,127 yards to go with 36 touchdowns and only 6 interceptions. And this wasn't even his best touchdown to interception ratio at all. And oh, by the way, Lamar did become just the second unanimous MVP in league history. So during the 2020 season, life was a little different. The world was dealing with things more important than sports. It's like the world had come to a halt and people were just there. They were just existing. We were not living life or enjoying the moment. No, we were just all trying to survive. Then there came a reprieve and sports returned, taking our mind off of things if only just for a moment. Sporting events moved forward without fans in the stands for the first time like ever, and all teams were affected in one way or another. So during this season, Lamar started 15 games. He did miss the Week 12 matchup versus the undefeated Steelers, in which the Ravens started Robert Griffin III once again. And in his only start, he did Robin Griffin things. He had 33 yards passing before leaving the game with an injury. And it's not funny that he got injured. It's just that Robert Griffin just, At the time, if you know, you know. Lamar went 11-4 in his 15 starts, passing for over 2,700 yards and throwing for 26 touchdowns. Then we got to the 2021 season where it brought about a first in the Lamar Jackson era. This is the one and only losing season while Lamar was with the team. Jackson started 12 games going 7-5 before getting hurt in the first half of a Week 14 game versus the Browns. Tyler Huntley would go on to start 4 games going 1-3, and Josh Johnson lost in his only start of the year. The Ravens ended the season by losing 6 straight games to fall to 8-9 and miss the playoffs. Not a pretty year at all. And then in 2022, it brought about much of the same. Lamar played in 12 games going 8-4. But this season, the Ravens held on to the cushion Lamar provided them before getting hurt versus the Broncos. And thank goodness, because the Ravens ended the year losing 3 of their last 5 games. Tyler Huntley started 4 games going 2-2, and even Anthony Brown played in and lost the season finale versus the Bengals. The same Bengals team that they were going to see a week later in the AFC wildcard round. Then the playoffs started.
That's short. That is short of it. What a play by Wilson.
In 2023, the Ravens and Lamar had a little debate over whether or not Lamar was one of the best quarterbacks in the league. The Ravens' argument was that he was injured the past 2 seasons and they didn't want to invest so much money into what they thought was the unknown. Lamar's argument was, I am f***ing Lamar Jackson. And despite not putting real offensive linemen around him to block, he knew what he was capable of. So on draft night, Lamar and the Ravens agreed to terms on a deal, making him the highest paid player in league history. And let me tell you, Lamar Jackson this season did not disappoint.
Take off and run, bounces away, still serving, still alive, throwing end zone, caught for the touchdown.
He started 16 games going 13-3 and led the Ravens to the best record in the league and the AFC's #1 seed. Tyler Huntley started the final game and of course they lost. But Lamar during the year demolished all the top teams in the NFC and put on a Monday night beatdown to the eventual Super Bowl participant San Francisco 49ers. This led to Lamar winning his 2nd MVP, and he also led the Ravens to the AFC Championship game for the first time. Now, fresh off of winning another MVP, Lamar was ready to take over the NFL world. This was his 2nd year in Todd Monken's offense. He had better skill position players around him, and Baltimore just signed Derrick Henry. Most people thought with the presence of the King, Lamar's passing would take a backseat and the Ravens would go back to the glory years of running the air out of the football. But nope. Lamar went Super Saiyan on the whole league. Lamar started all 17 games for the first time in his career. The other times he just didn't have to. And Lamar went stupid. With the Ravens rushing the ball 554 times, Lamar still passed for 4,172 yards. What's more insane is he had 41 passing touchdowns and only 4 interceptions, 3 of which went off of his receivers' hands. And I am not even going to discuss the 900 yards rushing and him having the 4th highest passer rating for a season ever, a stat they mistakenly tried to use to justify Josh Allen's MVP. But I digress. Lamar Jackson in 2024 had one of the best seasons a quarterback has ever had ever. So this was a quick history of all the Baltimore Ravens starting quarterbacks ever. And if you became a fan of the Ravens in the late 2010s, you missed out on all of the lean times. Baltimore used to be a franchise where quarterbacks went to die. And looking at this tapestry, each thread is a story of determination and reinvention. From Testaverde's veteran guile to Harbaugh's potential, from the tumultuous trials of the early 2000s to the stability of the Flacco era, and finally to the groundbreaking revolution of Lamar Jackson. Each quarterback has left an indelible mark on Baltimore's football history. Every name, every fleeting start, contributed to the evolution that shaped the fearless identity of the Ravens today. Thank you for joining this journey through the highs and the lows of our quarterback legacy. If you feel the heart of Baltimore beating in every play, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. This is the Road Pod. Keep the spirit alive. one epic story at a time, and stay legendary Ravens Nation.